Isaiah 45:3 is one of the least quoted verses in the entire Bible. God says, "I will give you the treasures of darkness and riches stored in secret places, not despite the darkness, not after the darkness ends. In it, through it, inside it." The word he uses is treasure. The Hebrew otzrei choshech means storehouses of value, hidden vaults set aside and protected, placed deliberately in the dark, not accidentally there, intentionally there, because the dark is where they belong, until the right person comes to find them. Most people read their dark season as evidence that God has stopped working. What if it is evidence of the opposite? What if the dark is not where God is absent, but where he is most specifically, most precisely, most deliberately at work? There are things God does in the darkest seasons that he simply cannot do in any other, not because he lacks the power to do them in the light, but because the nature of what he is building requires the conditions only darkness provides. I want to show you what those things are. And I want to show them to you from the text, not from a motivational framework, but from the actual patterns in Scripture. Because if you are in a dark season right now, you need to know this. The darkness around you is not empty. It is full of things that are being prepared specifically for you. Before we go into the specific works of darkness, I need to establish one principle that makes sense of all of them. Psalm 139:12 says, "Even the darkness is not dark to you. The night shines like the day, for darkness and light are alike to you." Darkness and light are alike to God. This means that the conditions which limit us, which slow us down, confuse us, make us feel hidden and forgotten, place no limitation on him at all. He operates in the dark as fluidly, as precisely, as deliberately as he operates in the light. Which means that when you are in a season where you cannot see, where the path is unclear, where the outcome is invisible, where you cannot make sense of what is happening, God is not similarly limited. He sees. He is working. He knows exactly where you are and exactly what he is doing in you. The darkness does not impair his work. In several specific ways, it actually enables it. Here is the principle. Certain works of God require conditions that only darkness can provide. Not because God prefers darkness, but because the nature of what he is building has specific requirements, and some of those requirements are only met in the hidden place, in the quiet, in the season when no one else can see. Let me show you 5 of them. The first thing God does in darkness that he cannot do in the light, he germinates what he has planted. A seed placed in the ground disappears. From the surface, nothing is visible. The field looks identical the week after planting and the week before it. The farmer who planted the seed cannot see what is happening, neither can anyone else who walks past. By every visible measurement, nothing is occurring. But underground, in the darkness and moisture of the soil, the most critical process in the seed's entire existence is taking place. The outer shell is softening. The embryo inside is activating. Roots are beginning to push outward. Everything that will eventually become visible above ground is first established in the dark, in the hidden place, in the season when no one is watching. This is not coincidence. It is design. Light is required for photosynthesis for the mature plant to grow, but germination, the initial activation of the seed's potential, happens underground, in the dark, without light. Joseph's years in Potiphar's house and in prison were germination years. On the surface, nothing. A slave doing administrative work, a prisoner forgotten by the one person who promised to remember him. No visible movement toward the dream God had given him at 17. By every external measurement, the story had gone backwards. But in those years, something was happening underground. The capacity for authority was being formed in a man who had once been arrogant enough to tell his brothers about dreams in which they bowed to him. The administrative ability that would later manage the food supply of an empire was being developed in the small, unglamorous details of a slave's responsibilities. The ability to endure betrayal without becoming bitter, the capacity to one day say you meant evil but God meant good, that was being formed in the dark, in the hidden place, in the season no one was watching. The dream God gave Joseph at 17 could not have been placed on the man Joseph was at 17. The 17-year-old Joseph would have crushed it. The man who emerged from 13 years of darkness could carry it. Here is the diagnostic for this first work. Is there something God placed in you, a promise, a calling, a desire that came from Him that has gone underground, that is no longer visible, no longer active by any surface measurement? The question is not whether it is dead. The question is whether it is germinating, because those two things look identical from above ground. Only one of them is. The second thing God does in darkness, He reveals what is actually present, which the light had been making invisible. Stars exist during the day. The same stars visible on a clear night are physically present at noon on a Tuesday. They have not disappeared. They have not dimmed. The sun's light is simply so overwhelming that it masks their presence completely. To see what is actually there, to see the full reality of what exists in the sky, you need the dark. Not because the stars need the dark, because your eyes do. Because what is there is only perceivable when the competing brightness is removed. Certain things about God become visible in dark seasons that cannot be seen in comfortable ones. Not because God is more present in darkness, but because the brightness of ordinary life, its activity, its noise, its abundance of options and distractions masks His presence the way sunlight masks the stars. He has always been there. In the dark season, for the first time, you can see Him. David writes in Psalm 63, "O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you, my flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water." The heading of that psalm tells us when it was written, when he was in the wilderness of Judah, running from Saul, in the desert, in the dark. The intimacy of Psalm 63, "Your steadfast love is better than life," that is not the language of a man in a palace. That is the language of a man in a wilderness who has had everything else stripped away and has discovered that what remains is enough, more than enough. It is language that could only be written in the dark. The Psalms David wrote in his comfortable years are not the ones that have sustained the church for 3,000 years. The ones that have carried people through the deepest suffering, that have been prayed in prison cells and hospital rooms, and moments of unspeakable grief, those came from the wilderness, from the cave of Adullam, from the desert of Judah, not in spite of the darkness, because of it. The darkness removed what was masking what was already there. The third thing God does in darkness, He builds the foundation. No one watches a foundation being laid. It happens underground, below the surface, before the first visible element of a structure appears. The deeper and more complex the building, the more extensive the underground work required before anything is visible above grade. A skyscraper's foundation can take months to excavate and pour before a single floor appears above street level. And this is the nature of foundations. They are only trustworthy if they were built properly in the hidden place. A foundation built quickly, built visibly, built for the audience, fails under pressure. The work that holds everything else up is almost always the work no one sees being done. Nehemiah built the walls of Jerusalem in 52 days. That is the number people remember the visible accomplishment, the remarkable timeline. But before those 52 days, Nehemiah spent months in prayer. He spent months fasting. He spent months being the cupbearer of the Persian king, while he processed the grief of what had been lost and developed the strategy for what would be rebuilt. The foundation of the 52-day wall was laid in the hidden months of prayer and preparation that nobody saw. Paul spent 3 years in Arabia after his Damascus Road conversion before any recorded public ministry. 3 years. In a region, in a season that Scripture mentions only briefly and then moves past. 3 years of what? receiving the revelation he would later describe as coming not from any human source, being rebuilt from the ground up from a man whose entire theological framework had to be completely reconstructed. Foundation work, hidden work, work that would eventually support the most significant theological output in the history of the Church. But nobody watched it happen. Nobody was there to see it. And that was precisely the point. The diagnostic for this third work is patience with invisible progress. If you are in a season where nothing visible is happening, the question is not whether work is being done. The question is what kind of work requires this much time underground before anything can appear above the surface. The fourth thing God does in darkness, He makes you someone who can lead others through it. This is the work that most people do not see coming. And it is perhaps the most significant work on this list. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness of Midian before he led Israel through the wilderness of Sinai. He learned the geography. He learned where water was. He learned how to survive in terrain that would have killed someone who did not know it. And then God sent him to lead 2 million people through the exact same wilderness. Joseph spent years in an Egyptian prison before he was placed in charge of the most significant food distribution operation in the ancient world during a 7-year famine. He learned administration in a place of powerlessness. He learned to maintain character under unjust conditions. He learned to interpret the dreams of desperate people, the cupbearer and the baker, in a prison with no audience before he ever interpreted the dream that mattered to a pharaoh in a palace. The darkness that preceded each assignment was not separate from the assignment. It was the qualification for it. The comfort you will be able to offer someone in a dark season is proportional to the dark seasons you have survived. Not the theology you have studied about dark seasons. The actual seasons. The nights you spent in a dark place and found that God was there. The mornings you woke up and nothing had changed, and you got up and stayed faithful anyway. Those experiences become transferable. They become the raw material of the ministry that is most needed in the world and most rare. The ability to sit with someone in darkness and not pretend it is not dark. Job's final restoration involved praying for his friends. The man who had gone deepest into suffering became the intercessor for others. He was positioned for that role by the darkness he had survived. No one else in that story was qualified to pray for those friends the way Job was, because no one else had been where Job had been. The fifth thing God does in darkness, He stores what the light would have exposed too soon. Return to Isaiah 45:3. The treasures of darkness are described as riches stored in secret places, stored, hidden away, not lost, not forgotten, placed there deliberately for the right moment. The original context of this verse is Cyrus, the Persian king, who would conquer Babylon and release the Jewish exiles. God had literally stored the treasures of Babylon's accumulated wealth in subterranean vaults in darkness, and promised they would be accessible to Cyrus when the appointed moment arrived. The treasure had been there for years, accumulating, hidden, waiting for the right person at the right time. But the principle extends far beyond Cyrus. There are things God stores in dark seasons that could not survive exposure to the light too early. A character that is still forming cannot bear the weight of a public platform. A vision that is still being refined cannot be handed to a person who would implement it prematurely. A gift that is still being shaped would be distorted by applause before it is ready. The darkness is protective. It is not punishment. It is the covering that allows what is being formed to reach completion before it is required to perform. The pearl is the most apt image. A pearl forms in the dark interior of an oyster over years, as layer after layer of nacre is deposited around an irritant. The process is slow, it is hidden. It produces something of extraordinary value, and none of it would have been possible in the light, in the open, in the comfortable. The pressure and the enclosure are not incidental to the pearl's formation. They are essential to it. Before I close, I need to say one thing carefully, because this framework can be misused. Not every dark season is an invitation to passive waiting. Some dark seasons require action, the courage to leave a situation, to seek help, to make a decision that has been avoided. Discernment matters here, and it is not always simple. And not every dark season is about preparation for something visible. Some of the deepest works of God in dark seasons produce things that are only perceivable to the person experiencing them: a depth of faith, a quality of intimacy with God, a freedom from fear that never becomes a platform or a testimony in public. That is not a lesser outcome. Some of the most important things God builds in the dark are things that were never meant for anyone else to see. The darkness is not a guarantee of a particular outcome. It is the description of a particular process. And the process is always purposeful, even when the purpose is not yet visible. So let me bring this to where you are. If you are in a dark season, if you are underground, if the field above you looks unchanged, if the stars you know are there cannot be seen in the competing light of other people's visible progress, here is what the text asks you to hold. The seed is not dead because you cannot see it growing. The foundation is not absent because it has not yet appeared above grade. The stars are not gone because the conditions for seeing them have not yet arrived. And Isaiah 45:3 is in the canon. God said it. He called what is in the dark treasure, not waste, not punishment, not absence. Treasure. The treasure being stored in your dark season, the character being formed, the intimacy being deepened, the foundation being laid, the capacity to walk with others through their darkness being built in you is real. Even when you cannot hold it yet, even when you cannot see it yet, especially then. On the morning of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb while it was still dark. John records that detail deliberately. Still dark, not at sunrise, not in the light of day, while it was still dark. She came to a place of death, in darkness, expecting nothing but to finish the burial process for someone she had loved and lost. She was not there for a miracle. She was not there in faith. She was there in grief, in the dark, to do the last remaining thing she could think to do. And the resurrection had already happened, not when the sun rose, not when the other disciples arrived, not when it became light enough for everyone to see clearly. In the dark, while it was still dark, before anyone could see, before anyone knew, the tomb was already empty when Mary arrived in the darkness. The work had already been done. The most significant event in human history had taken place in the dark, in the hidden place, in the pre-dawn hours before a single witness was present. That is not incidental. That is the character of the God who stores treasures in darkness. He does his deepest work before the light arrives. He finishes what he starts in the hidden place. And when the morning comes, and it will come, you will find that more was done in the dark than you had any way of knowing. The treasure was there all along.